Kumana Island. It's a place of excitement.
This week in gaming, Steam has been blocked in Malaysia. A big update came to Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball. PAX East has been announced for March 10th through 12th, 2018. Games Done Quick raised $200,000 for the Houston Food Bank in the wake of Hurricane Harvey. LA Noire is coming to current-gen consoles and VR. Ubisoft is fighting to stave off a hostile takeover by Vivendi. Gaming Community Raptor is shutting down. You can grab SteamWorld Dig on the house. The DRM on Sonic Mania has been cracked. And Okami HD Remastered has been rated by Korea's Game Ratings Board for PS4, PC, and Xbox One. This is 1RBC Gaming Weekly. To start with, Valve's Steam service has been blocked for gamers in Malaysia by the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission. This is in the wake of a video game called Fight of Gods being released on the service. In case the name doesn't give it away, it's a video game in which various religious figures fight with one another. As you may rightly assume, it's cheaply made and seems to have been designed to stir up controversy. The game's recent editions of Jesus and Gautama Buddha seem to have set Malaysia's censorship board over the edge. According to Reverend Dr. Herman Shastri, Malaysia's General Secretary of the Council of Churches, this game stands to contaminate the religious harmony of the country. The Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission had reportedly contacted Valve and demanded the game's removal for Malaysia within 24 hours. Valve failed to respond, as is custom, and thus the whole store has been blocked for the country. Valve, upon noticing that their money was at stake, eventually moved to geo-block the game for Malaysian purchasers. At the time of production, however, Steam is still unavailable in their country. For the developers, I'm going to go ahead and assume that this is what they were hoping for. Easy publicity for their game. It's ugly as sin, by the way. Already, the Steam review page is full of users who bought the game despite the censors. The reviews from the users who bought it hoping for a worthwhile video game are by and large full of disappointment. Frame rate issues, terrible controls, repetitive gameplay. You get the picture. All these things plague Fight of Gods, which is available for Windows everywhere that's not Malaysia. If you were a Raptor user, I'm sorry to inform you that the service is ending after a decade. Now, in case you'd not heard of Raptor, it started back in 2007 as a social network. This is back when it was trendy to drop the vowel before a final R in your social network. You know, the way that Tumblr and Flickr have. Regarding Raptor, it was meant to be a social network for gamers that offered an easy way to track played time, achievements unlocked, and chat with friends between different platforms. You could show off unlocking the same achievement on the Steam, Xbox, and PS3 versions of games. Now, 10 years ago, we didn't have Discord, and Steam wasn't quite as robust as it is today. So back then, Raptor was a great idea. Today, though, Raptor is pretty obsolete. The company has actually begun reaching into the streaming and esports world with Plays.tv, which split off as an independent company back in January of this year. Now, if you're interested in seeing how many hours you spent on your Xbox back in 2009, you can log into Raptor right now and export your gameplay history. Personally, I'm gonna miss Raptor. While I haven't used it in a very long time, I remember how they held some awesome giveaways back in the day, how they offered a centralized gaming hub of sorts. It was a different time in my life, really. I still fondly remember Raptor alongside Get Glue and Daily Booth, and well, this is a news program and not a nostalgia program, isn't it? Nonetheless, I do find it a little disheartening that Raptor and Miiverse are being shut down. Gamers are finding new spaces, but it seems that gaming communities are becoming less and less intimate these days. What do you think? Is this growing trend towards big, impersonal gaming communities worrisome? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and let us know what you think. We'd be happy to share your thoughts on next week's episode. Meanwhile, over on YouTube, you folks have had a whole lot to say about the shutdown of Miiverse on the Wii U. There are a ton of great comments here, but one in particular I'd like to mention is coming from a YouTuber by the name of Disco Master Zero, who says that it's a service that has provided a social experience that you can't get from other social networking sites. This person has spent a long time just browsing through posts and being a guru for a few virtual console games that people were playing for the first time and getting stuck, chronicling adventures through other games. It really seems that Nintendo is tossing out the baby with the bathwater. Thank you all again for your responses, and if you've got something to say, please, let us know. We are more than happy to share your thoughts on this show. Regarding Ubisoft, this week it came to light that the Guillemot family has acquired an additional 1.75% of Ubisoft after purchasing 2 million shares. As of this week, they own 15.35% of the company. The Guillemot family, specifically the brothers Yves and Michael, in case you didn't know, are the reason why Ubisoft exists in the first place, being the French game publisher's founders. The reason they're buying up shares in their own company is to fight off a bid by Vivendi, which has been attempting a hostile takeover of Ubisoft for a good long time. Vivendi is a French media conglomerate that owns Canal+, Dailymotion, and formerly owned Activision Blizzard, which split from Vivendi in 2013. While we're talking about Activision, this week they released Destiny 2, which has thus far garnered a pretty good critical and fan response. From what I've been hearing, it fixes some of the issues that the original game had, and while it apparently doesn't feel like a sequel in that it doesn't add on much to the experience, it certainly improves upon it. The reason I'm talking about it right now, however, is because it has a bit of an issue. Microtransactions. Specifically, single-use item microtransactions, which you can only use once to make certain in-game items prettier. Not really a big deal, but it would have been nice if players were warned that these things could only be used once due to the fact that it's a change from the previous game. Additionally, it's now possible to purchase so-called mods from an in-game shop. These mods offer buffs for your characters, armor, etc. Basically, you can buy yourself an advantage in the game. That does not bode well, and the Destiny 2 community is pretty incensed over it. Personally, I'm fine with selling in-game cosmetic items, but selling stuff that buffs your character crosses the line. What's the point of playing to improve when somebody can just buy their way to the top? What do you think? Has Destiny 2 taken microtransactions too far? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and let us know. In other news, Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball received a pretty big update this week. It introduces the Diamond level, a massive map with the titular diamond in the center, a tank battle mode in which players have a health bar and cannot catch dodgeballs, Disco Dodgeball is otherwise Instagib, and a lightning round mode with 30-second matches. First player to 5 victories wins the game. Now, in case you're somehow unfamiliar with the fantastic Robot Roller Derby Disco Dodgeball, what you should know is that it's this incredibly creative FPS about robots tossing dodgeballs, in a disco, of course. It's a very fast-paced game with a very friendly community. I recommend checking it out if you're after an FPS that offers something unique. If you're into adventure games, good news. Point-and-click classic Siberia is coming to the Nintendo Switch on October 20th, 2017. The game's premise is that you play as a lawyer named Kate Walker. During a trip to the French Alps to facilitate the sale of an automaton factory, Kate discovers something unexpected and thus embarks on a steampunkish adventure. Siberia is a well-loved game, though it does show its age in some spots. Hopefully there's a little extra polish on this Switch version of the game by Koa Labs. There are 2 other Siberia games. The third is sadly regarded as the weakest entry in the series. That said, if this Switch version of the game really takes off, we may be seeing it and the second game coming to the console at a later date. In game releases this week, Knack 2 came to the PS4, and thus far, it's been critically panned as sort of mediocre. You see, the game is a 3D platformer about this golem-ish creature made of thousands of bits and pieces of, well, I'm not really sure, and the trouble is that the game can't convince anybody to care. The game's settings are at once random and generic. The story and characters are predictable and boring, and the gameplay, while serviceable, and actually pretty fun at some points, doesn't really do anything particularly special. The game's gimmick is that the protagonist can change his size to solve puzzles and fight angry robots. Also, this being the second game, it supports a second player for co-op. So overall, it seems to be a formulaic game, and while it's not particularly exciting, it's not actually a bad game. You could do better, but you could do a whole lot worse. That said, if you're looking for a big improvement over the original Knack, you're not going to find it in Knack 2. The game Reaching for Petals was released on Steam this week for Windows, and it's been picking up some mixed reviews. The game is a walking simulator, its premise being that you're walking through somebody's memories, as is tradition, while listening to a narrator reading poetry. Standard walking simulator stuff. Now, it seems that different folks have different feelings on the game's narration. Poetry's pretty subjective, after all. While many are praising the game's aesthetic, apparently it has some rough edges, as I've been hearing reports that it can be tricky to navigate in some places for no clear reason. According to one Steam user, a staircase was almost unclimbable? That's a bit embarrassing. Personally, I'm fond of walking simulators, and I like the concept behind Reaching for Petals, but I think I'm going to hold off on picking it up until it's a bit more polished. While it's available on Windows right now, it's set to be released on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 at a later date. One game that took me by surprise this week on Steam is Academia School Simulator. Now, this is coming from the artist of Prison Architect, but not the same developer. That said, the premise isn't entirely dissimilar. In Academia School Simulator, you design and build up a school. From there, you hire teachers, manage your budget, and try to figure out what's going to work best for your high school students. Now, bear in mind, the game's not finished. It is currently in early access. That said, I'd like to get my hands on this one. I have a special fondness for simulator and tycoon-style games. Academia School Simulator looks like it has a lot of personality. Bear in mind, it just hit Steam, so there aren't a whole lot of user reviews yet, but thus far, they seem to be pretty positive. This is definitely a game that I'll be keeping an eye on. Academia School Simulator is currently available for Windows. In crowdfunding projects this week, the Kickstarter for Full Quiet has my eye. I'll let the trailer speak for itself.
Son, breakfast!
It was a morning that started just like any other. The most important meal of the day. Bacon. Pancakes. Eggs. The works. But after that day, nothing would ever be the same again.
Son? Son! Son, where are you? I've got to find my son.
Armed with intelligence, his inventions, his wit, and his rifle. This is one man's journey to rescue his boy, punish his captors, and restore order to the land that his father kept safe for decades. He would stop at nothing until he could silence the forest once again. This is Full Quiet.
That's right, folks. Full Quiet is actually an NES game. It's pretty unusual to see games being developed for that platform in this day and age, but not entirely unheard of. There are a number of ongoing projects to bring new games to classic consoles, such as the Dreamcast and Sega Genesis. That said, the NES doesn't seem to be the most popular target for this sort of homebrew. Regarding the game itself, Full Quiet is going to blend action and puzzles as you befriend amicable forest creatures and hunt down the beast that's kidnapped your son. While Full Quiet is in development for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and you can drop $50 on the Kickstarter campaign for a shiny new cartridge, you can also just drop $10 for a Steam key for the PC version of the game. Full Quiet is set to come out September of 2018.
Son, I made all these pancakes!
Another game on Kickstarter that caught my attention is Griff, the Winged Lion. While Ukulele, which launched earlier this year, had quite the focus on bringing classic early 3D platforming into the modern era, Griff, the Winged Lion seems to wallow in nostalgia. It's styled after Spyro and Crash and everything about it, right down to the funny stiff animations and visual artifacts overlaid into the game, are taken right out of the 90s. Will nostalgia for mid-90s era styled games prove to be as effective at selling games as 8-bit era styling seems to be? That is hard to say for certain. I myself am not big on the low poly look. I generally prefer the clean, modern way that it's done over the clunky 20th century video game style. That said, the game itself sounds pretty interesting. You play as the winged lion, Griff, who's not a griffin, that's Gavin, and you run around using King Midas's glove to turn monsters into collectible pieces of gold. If you'd like to try Griff the Winged Lion, there's a demo available on its Kickstarter page. The game is set to be released on PC, Xbox One, and PS4 December of 2018. Finally, I'd like to share my thoughts on a game I picked up over the summer. The state of the video game industry today is such that games are more often bought based upon their underlying concept than their actual execution of said concept. It's why we have so many disappointments in Steam Early Access right now, but it's also how some really interesting and innovative indie games have found their audiences. If you have a cool idea for a game and the talent to show it off, perhaps through a flashy trailer, one that adequately demonstrates your concept, you're halfway to selling the game. I feel that this must be said outright. Community Inc. is not finished. Right now on Steam, the game lacks the Early Access banner, and this is coverage of the game's version 1.0.12. I honestly think that the developers have made huge mistakes in labeling this game as ready for sale. The premise of Community Inc. isn't too complicated. Set in a fantasy world, it's a real-time strategy game in which you're put in charge of a village, and you need to make said village profitable. To do this, you can hire villagers, lings. These villagers build structures, conduct trade, collect and refine raw resources, and fend off wolf attacks. At the start of the game, you're granted a bit of principle which you can use to hire newlings, and perhaps curry favor with your neighbors. Perhaps the mushroom men are in need of some money, which you can supply. As your lings go about their day-to-day activities, they level up, albeit a little bit dubiously. More on that later. When they reach certain levels, they can take on new jobs. For example, a miner who spent his days digging up clay and stones can become a sculptor and form the clay into pots and roofing tiles. The game features a pretty simple diplomacy system in which some groups of creatures arbitrarily hate others. The dragon people might hate the cat people, might hate the tree people, for example, so choosing to do business with the cat people may draw the ire of the dragon people. If you accept a quest but fail to deliver, you'll damage your relationship with the group, whereas if you accept the quest and actually deliver, your relationship improves and you're less likely to go to war. The game doesn't really spell out the advantages to forming alliances, which made me care less about maintaining relationships above the baseline in order to keep trade going. Now, the day-night cycle of Community Inc. adds a unique element to your strategy. As you're playing the game, the clock is ticking. Days don't pass particularly quickly, they feel much longer than the days in Pikmin, and they're always busy, assuming you're playing the game correctly. Now, when the night actually comes, activity doesn't stop right away. Your lings will continue to work for a while before going to bed, assuming that there are beds, or at the very least, tents. If they have to sleep on the cold hard ground, they'll lose some morale, which makes them less efficient workers. In all, the gameplay is pretty interesting. I don't think it's fully fleshed out quite yet, but it shows a lot of potential. Is it worth buying Community Inc. based solely on its potential? Right now, I don't think that's the case. For starters, the game has more bugs than the underside of a powdered wig. One of the issues that I encountered was that I could order the crafting of several units of a very specific item, and the lings would get to work. Then, when I went to access the items, they just didn't exist. The resources were spent, but the items? Gone. This is a worrisome wrinkle when you're trying to accomplish one of the game's quests. Diplomacy is on the line, and suddenly, you don't have those 20 pieces of fencing that you went through the trouble of producing for the well-paying tree people. Remember, kids, the clock on those quests is ticking. Something particularly annoying is that early in the game, your item storage is pretty limited. Because you don't really have direct control over your lings, you just decide where they're allowed to forage, as well as what jobs they'll have. It's all too easy to allow them to forage out of control, picking up items until your inventory's full of rocks you have no immediate use for. You can't build a storage warehouse without certain materials, such as clay roofing shingles, and you can't produce those without a couple pieces of specialized equipment and a specific unit. And you can't have that unit unless your miner is experienced. Perhaps experienced enough to have an inventory filled with rocks. You can't produce anything until your inventory has space. Inventory management can be a game to itself, but Community Inc. doesn't handle it in an engaging or thought-provoking way. I just found myself sighing when it came time to throw away the rocks and logs that my workers had gone through the trouble of collecting. Now, the game doesn't offer a lot of feedback or valuable information. How exactly do your lings level up? For instance, I wanted a blacksmith as the game went on. This way I could produce more advanced tools. The trouble is, for a ling to become a blacksmith, it must first be a level 5 builder. All of my builders were level 4, and there was no indication as to how one could level them up to 5. Just keep building things? There's no clear feedback system to inform you of how close your lings are to leveling up. There's just an embarrassingly tiny notification to let you know when it actually happens. Are my lings gaining experience points building the same things over and over again, or do I need to build something new? I'm in the dark. Personally, I intend to keep an eye on Community Inc., as it shows a lot of potential. It's incredibly ambitious, and at times feels like a fantasy version of The Sims, mixed with Castaway, along with its own city building and real-time strategy thing. Have you been playing Community Inc.? If so, what do you think? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for this week's game news. For all the greatest game news, interviews, and editorial, be sure to follow at OneRuleBeCool on Twitter and Instagram. Follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views.